Good evening and welcome to the Let's Rethink Plastic Ask the Experts panel. My name's Mary Armstrong and I'm the moderator. And as your moderator, I will be periodically reminding everyone to please remain on mute. Who organized this? I'm the resource lead of the Harrisville team for the 10 Towns initiative, and we kind of spearheaded it. But I wanted to give you a little historical timeline. So there's a New Hampshire network organization that began in January 2021, and it had a broad focus of environment, energy, and climate. And they created a subgroup called the Plastics Working Group in about August of 2021. And from that group, they shared their expertise and created the 10 Towns Initiative Toolkit. And Harrisville was one of the initial 10 towns on board. And so one of our actions was, let's do a panel with experts, and that's really the history of this. And I've shared several websites here. I will be posting them in the chat periodically throughout the presentations. You'll always have them at hand. And our other organizer is the Keene State College CALL Program for adult learners that we're using their Zoom license, which is great. We thank them. So what inspired this event? We decided we wanted to honor Plastic Free July. And that is a global movement that began in Australia back in 2011. And it helps people be part of the solution to plastic pollution. So it's now worldwide, and we encourage you to sign up. Their link is right there. If you just remember Plastic Free July, you can Google that and get it. And they have a font of information, a wealth of information, of ideas, and to take up the challenge. And it's really hard to give up all plastic, but you can do little things and it'll be great. So our panelists, we are so honored to have three very talented people that have given up some time. They have a laundry list of titles, but I just picked the main ones for this little intro. So Joshua Arroyo-Torres, he's going to go first. He's the manager of the Institute for International Conservation. Christina Dubin will go second. She's the campaigns coordinator for Surfrider, New Hampshire. And Albert Diamond will be going third, the co-founder and owner of Elm City Compost. And to explain the format, let me get to the right screen. So each of our panelists will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. And we ask the listeners to please enter your questions into the chat as they come in mind, addressed to everybody. And then if you have a particular person you'd like to answer the question, you can note that. And then when the Q&A period begins, the moderator, myself, will read the questions and ask the specified or determined expert. So please keep yourself on mute until you're recognized by the moderator if we need clarification. And then again, to reassure you, we're going to share information via email after the meeting to all registrants for the link of the recording and any other good information. So our speaker focus and speaker order, we decided to go from the broader global perspective down to the more narrower. So Joshua, I will stop sharing and you can start us off here.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that introduction. So hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Arroyo. You can call me Josh. I'm also a sustainability fellow with the University of New Hampshire. And I'm finishing my master's in environmental studies at Antioch University. So I'm gonna be talking about plastics impacts and environmental justice. So starting off with a couple of definitions, very important to consider with what I'm going to talk about, is environmental justice as it guarantees that all people have equal access to a healthy, safe, and sustainable environment as well as equal protection from environmental harm. So other definitions worth considering is what is not an environmental justice. So we have distributional injustice as inequitable environmental burdens, that is referring to who pays the cost of these environmental impacts. Procedural injustice as having no voice and no control over environmental decisions that directly affect you. And other concept is substantive injustice, meaning that these impacts pose a threat to yourself and directly is impacting you and affecting your health. So starting with a brief overview of plastic impacts, plastics have over 144 toxic chemical components that are a hazard to human health. Facilities that produce these chemicals are predominantly located in low-income community of color. And it is clearly an environmental justice issue of disproportionate pollution risks. So plastics life cycle is expected to contribute a total of 1.34 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Nonetheless, the United States has been the #1 plastic polluter with 42 million metric tons of plastic waste, which are exported to developing countries for the impossible task of recycling that volume, mostly composed of single-use plastics. And additionally, consumable single-use plastics are commonly later or easily carried away by the wind. Once in the environment, plastics are not degradable and can take hundreds of years to break down into smaller pieces, and by doing so, also release CO2 emissions. And single-use plastics are broken down into smaller parts into synthetic plastic fibers, are aggressively spreading into our oceans, rivers, soils, wildlife, food, bodies, and the air we breathe. It's also worth noting that single-use plastics are derived from petrochemicals, requiring a significant dependency on oil to sustain their industrial production. Can you all see my slides, right? Right. So to visualize the magnitude of the problem and the direct connection of plastics with climate change, this infographic shows that the projected exponential growth of the plastic industry will lead us to have much greater CO2 emissions comparing to hundreds of coal power plants. With plastic production being expected to increase by 40% by 2030, not giving attention to the problem of plastics can offset the progress made in mitigating climate change by moving to renewable energy for reducing carbon emissions. So a report from the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists has stated, quote, numerous previous reports have documented that people of color and those living in poverty are exposed to higher levels of environmental pollution than whites or people not living in poverty. And studies have also found that compared to national averages, a significantly greater percent of African Americans, Latinos, and people living at or near poverty levels tends to live near industrial facilities that use large quantities of toxic chemicals and present a risk of major chemical disasters. The disproportionate health impacts on these communities from environmental degradation are amplified by other negative socioeconomic and health determinants, such as the lack of access to healthcare, public transportation, healthy food, and lack of political representation and stress from unemployment, poverty, and crime, among other factors. So in that same report, the case of Houston, Texas is examined. This city is a center for chemical industries, but not everyone is affected equally by their operations. This is precisely what this study sought to bring to light by comparing social, economic, demographic data in 4 communities. 2 of them being low income and composed of people of color residents, and the other 2 being of higher income and much lower numbers of people of color residents.
I'm not understanding what we're talking about here.
So here we have the location of the communities. We have Galena Park, Manchester, Harrisburg, Bellier, and West Oaks Aldrich. The first 2 are low-income communities, and the last 2 are higher-income communities. So on the slides, I have the some tests that it's helpful for people to read through as I talk. And on this slide, here are the location of hazardous chemical facilities. And here we see the evidently higher number of accidents that take place in the facilities located in low-income communities. It's clear that environmental protections are not as enforced in these communities in comparison to the wealthier and whiter ones. So looking into another national example, the testimony of Cheryl Levin, an environmental justice advocate from St. James, Louisiana, tells us the story about when plastics plants and petrochemical refineries were introduced in her community. Quote, "When I was a little girl, I used to play outside with my siblings and neighbors and breathe clean air and drink clean water. And my family lived off the land. We were not sick. We did not have to go to the doctor. As industry started to come into my community, I witnessed neighbors getting sick and dying. Our air is now polluted with carcinogens that cause cancer." So what about other countries? This quote from New York Times reporters highlights the issue of plastics on an international scale. In the context of the Basel Convention that set new rules on plastic waste exports. Quote, "Data shows that American exporters continue to ship plastic waste overseas, often to poorer countries, even though most of the world has agreed not to accept it." So what can be done? After looking at the scale and some consequences of the plastic problem, we must address the problem from its source to prevent the local international environmental injustices that are caused by the plastic system. And we must aim to close the plastic tap, like this metaphor shows in this image. So closing with 2 main takeaways. If 2 things that you should remember from this presentation is that plastics are a significant driver for increasing emissions that contribute to global warming. And 2, reducing single-use plastics is an act of solidarity with fence-line communities more directly impacted by the plastic industry. So every action that we take counts towards the goal of defunding the oil industry and plastic industry. So here's my references. Thank you so much for your attention. I'll pass it on to Mary.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And I'm going to pass it to Christina.
Thank you, Mary. It's like a complicated.
That was fast.
I'm using two screens, so that's why you might see me looking up, and I will just share here. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm assuming, unless anyone shouts at me, I'm assuming that my slides are up. So again, I'm Christina Dubin. I am the New Hampshire Volunteer Secretary and Campaigns Coordinator for Surfrider Foundation New Hampshire Chapter. And I'm also the Rockingham Resource Leader for the 10 Towns initiative. And I will be talking about local policy for the reduction of single-use plastics. Just a couple quick slides. If you're not familiar with the Surfrider Foundation, we are a national nonprofit, and we work to protect the ocean waves and beaches for all people via a volunteer network. And we do this by focusing on plastic pollution, ocean protection, beach access, coastal preservation, and clean water. And so I lead, within plastic pollution, I lead the chapter's Rise Above Plastics program. So first, let's look at the landscape here in New Hampshire. Half of the trash that is landfilled, that is sent to landfill in New Hampshire, is from out of state. And we cannot restrict this because of the interstate commerce clause within the Constitution. And that's for private landfills. If you look at the chart, you'll see that the Northeast maintains the highest tipping fees in the country. Tipping fees, if you're not familiar, are the cost of actually tipping the waste out of the truck into the landfill, and that eventually comes back to municipalities. However, New Hampshire has the lowest fee compared to our neighbors. So we are a cheaper place, we're the cheapest place for our neighboring states to send their waste. So Massachusetts, we tend to get a lot of Massachusetts waste going into our landfill. There are 6 active New Hampshire landfills. 2 of them are private. There's Turnkey, which is owned by Waste Management, and that is located in Rochester, and North Country, which is owned by Casella, and that is located in Bethlehem. So there's a debate about how much space is left in landfills, as you can see from a 2019 Department of Environmental Services report, the chart there on the right. But the problem is not about the capacity, but rather what is filling that capacity. And that's because we have source reduction coming down the pike here in New Hampshire. And this is due to legislation which created the Solid Waste Working Group, and also the our new solid waste disposal reduction goals of 25% less waste sent to landfill by 2030 and 45% by 2050. The Solid Waste Working Group is made of stakeholders within Waste Management, and it's led by Representative Karen Ebel. And they are pulling together an initial report for this November, or I think by the end of November. And that will contain recommendations for methods and policies to meet those waste reduction goals. And the 2 private companies, Waste Management and Casella, have made it clear that if they lose, New Hampshire generated waste filling those landfills, they will be looking to backfill with more out-of-state waste. That means more plastic, and that is going to potentially harm our tourism industry and also public health. A significant portion of waste is from single-use products, and many single-use products are composed partly, if not entirely, of plastic. So a 2018 EPA report found that nearly 20% of waste sent to landfill is plastic. Plastic does not biodegrade, it photodegrades into tiny pieces known as microplastics. And at this point, scientists have found microplastics throughout the entire human body, including blood and live lung tissue. Another issue is that there is leachates, right, at the bottom of landfills. It's like that toxic soup. And that contains microplastics as well as forever chemicals like PFAS. So often plastic is coated with forever chemicals or other chemicals. And these chemicals can get into groundwater and into our drinking water. And that's why this legislative season, the Senate passed a bill that originated in the House that would have extended the buffer zone between landfills and bodies of water. But unfortunately, Governor Sununu vetoed it. So we need municipalities to step up and not wait for state policy change. And that solution is varied local action. So we've seen that local efforts have created the case for the support of statewide law, and that local action is the best approach to really keep building this momentum for change from the bottom up. We can look to Maine as a great example of this. So if you look at the map on the top, that is all of the single-use bag bans at the municipal level prior to the state level bag law that went into effect in 2021. And so it's important to have this varied action across the state where all the policies are just a little bit different, because it makes legislators want to streamline, and it's tough for industry as well if there's different rules in different places. Importantly, I do want to note that Maine included a fee on paper bags so that they were not just switching from one single-use product to another single-use product. There are bad single-use policies, so it's really important to look to best practices, to look to organizations that are doing this work and can help you. And that's one of the main reasons why we're here tonight. Another reason why we need municipalities to step up is because we want to avoid preemption. So in the bottom map, which is of the United States, the shades, the hexagons that are in shades of orange are states where there is a range of preemption legislation that prevents localities from adopting single-use policies. So again, we want to stay ahead of that and have municipalities bringing these policies soon. So you may already know that New Hampshire is a Dillon's rule state versus a home rule state. And that means that municipalities need enabling legislation at the state level. So you may have heard that as an argument against bringing a local policy. However, we do believe that all municipalities in New Hampshire have inherent authority to create policies for source reduction through 149-M. That's our state solid waste regulations that sits within the public health chapter under the New Hampshire state statutes known as RSAs. And we have multiple legal opinions which support this. And Portsmouth, where I live, has tested this authority with the passage of a citywide ordinance banning polystyrene. We also do have a city property ordinance that deals with various single-use food packaging and cups and that sort of thing, but that's on city property. So really we're looking at the polystyrene ban that is citywide. We have not been challenged, and if we were, we would simply take that ordinance off the books and there would be no harm. And that is the same case for all other municipalities. If you look at the waste hierarchy on the right, you'll see that source reduction is at the top. And this is how we can reach our new state waste reduction goals and how we're going to get rid of plastic in our state. Remember that initial report from the solid waste working group is due out in November, and it would not go unnoticed. We would make sure that it would not go unnoticed, that there are all these local actions being taken. And so there's a real chance here for cities and towns to shape state level policy. So there's three main policy options that I'll just throw out there. One is to work with your city council or select board to introduce an ordinance or a warrant article that bans something like polystyrene cups or polystyrene food packaging. The second is you can request a proclamation, which Dover and some other cities and towns have done just this month for Plastic Free July. And that's issued by, again, your select board or city council. Or you could submit a resolution, which is voted on by the council or the select board. And this is a more formal expression of the municipality's opinion or intention. And that could just be about your city or town stating their efforts to get rid of single-use plastic. And I just have a couple, if you want to screenshot any of these slides, feel free, or again, there will be a recording. So I'm going to leave it at that. This is just a listing of beach cleanups that our chapter does on a monthly basis. Should you ever want to attend, it's a really great way to see that there is indeed a plastic problem here in New Hampshire. You know, with environmental justice issues, it can be hard to see how production is harming communities. We don't see it here so much, but you can directly see the pollution and, you know, start to think more about the issue of plastic in that way. There's also a couple of meetings coming up, the New Hampshire Network Plastic Group meeting that launched the 10 Towns, 10 Actions Toolkit, and also a Surfrider meeting as well. So feel free to reach out to me through either 10 Towns or Surfrider if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Christina. And Albert, it's your turn.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone who's already presented. It's always kind of nice to be the final presenter. So let's get this started. So my name is Albert Diamond. I am the owner and operator of Elm City Compost Initiative. We are a very local grassroots waste diversion company. Our goal is to try to get as much organic matter out of the landfills as possible and make sure that it's processed in the correct way, mainly by composting that material. So we have a simple and affordable service that we offer. And I'm kind of here today to talk a little bit about like the on the ground, some things that have to do with compostable plastics, how those get processed on the local level, like what are some methods that we can use, some good things to understand, and also just kind of hack out the role of composting when we talk about waste and single-use items. So, you know, we just got to discuss a little bit about that New Hampshire waste report. Now, of course, trash and waste is kind of a very fascinating issue, and landfills are, we're all pretty aware that landfills aren't a super sustainable way to process those materials. So of course, like composting is really good, especially when you see that about 30 to 40% of all the things that we throw away on a daily basis are organic in nature once made from a plant or animal and can probably be turned right back into soil. So kind of a driving force for us is to acknowledge that the landfills in our region are getting close to capacity. It is a blow to hear that those places are going to keep importing more and more, even as we try to get waste out of those landfills. But we still hold true to the idea that we should try to divert as much organic matter as possible from these so that we can actually reduce some of that methane production and really increase that soil production that we can get out of those viable materials. So kind of we want to jump into compostable plastics, because I know that's kind of an interesting topic. So we're lucky as a company, Elm City Compost, because we get to work with a facility that can accept these compostable plastics, but we have a lot of kind of rules we have to abide by in order to bring this material, and it's more complicated than like done on a simple. So we're kind of lucky in that respect. So I just want to go through some three kind of classifications of plastic for us, really. There's the normal plastic, which we've been talking about, petroleum-based, got to take hundreds, thousands of years to fully break down, can be very, very harmful. There's this kind of catch-all phrase that gets thrown around a lot, which is biodegradable plastics. Very much kind of a misdirection. The bio in the name definitely makes it easier to market as a greener product, although many of these biodegradable plastics are still made from petroleum-based plastics or will have other chemicals attached to them, and they won't break down in the same way that they should. So it's an easy way to mislead some average consumers. So I kind of want to get into what compostable plastic is and how you can actually certify it. And what we do is we accept very specific materials. One of those is BPI certified. So the BPI is the Biodegradable Products Institute, and they're there to test materials for how they will break down in industrial composting conditions or very specific conditions. So they have kind of a rigorous testing method to ensure that these materials will break down without microplastics or without, I always say PFAs, but PFAS. So, those are, of course, those permanent chemicals. And so BPI will actually go test these products, make sure that these things don't exist in the final product, and they'll keep track of those companies. There's a running database of who they work with, who's certified, and they touch base with those companies every 2 years or so to double check that nothing's changed in the processing, nothing's changed in the making of the product. So they're pretty tight about that. But even when you have these compostable plastics, you have to kind of realize that there's a proper way to dispose of them. So, whenever we think compost, a lot of times we're thinking of the home backyard compost pile, and we're not really thinking about the large industrial composting systems that these products were designed for. So anything that is BPI certified compostable will break down 90% within 60 days in an underneath industrial composting conditions, which are really high temperatures, very active microbial activity, usually very large. So these compost conditions aren't often met in a home composting unit. So if you were to toss those compostable products in your home compost, they might stay there for a couple of years. And I've definitely heard some firsthand account of this myself. So, that is just something to acknowledge, that even these materials only have a 90% breakdown. So oftentimes they have to get reprocessed through the composting site. So, and that's tough because some municipal composters or commercial composters have very specific methods, and they can even complete their active composting phase within 30 days if they have enough aeration and management of that pile. So, compostable plastics are really hard to integrate into every system, and it makes them a very challenging material to work with and to accept. So when we talk about having compostable plastics to replace other single-use plastics, we really have to acknowledge that in order for these materials to be any benefit, we need very much to have access to full access to commercial composting sites or municipal composting and food diversion. Because if we don't have access to the correct disposal, those plastics are still going to end up in places they shouldn't, in landfills where they're going to be just as harmful and not break down correctly. They're going to end up in oceans, shores, and beaches. And just like I was trying to say earlier, those are not the ideal composting conditions for these materials to break down. So, if it was me, I'd love to see a compost collection site next to every single trash can or recycling can. But that's something that we as communities need to be invested in, need to see as one of the solutions, especially if we're going to try to bring in more single-use compostable packaging options. It is kind of exciting to see it as a solution in some ways, because there are a lot of things that are troublesome to replace and to not use. And there are continual advances in those compostable packaging industries. But, we need to also be cognizant that as more of these products hit the market, there needs to be more rigorous certifications, regulations on what can be sold, and a really broad understanding and education of where these products need to go in order to be processed in the right way. So I'm really hoping that this conversation can just spark a little bit of that internal investigation. It's always good to know what you're throwing away on a daily basis. And it's also really good to know what resources you have locally to dispose of those products. So, you know, I hope that was a little helpful in talking about single-use compostable items, compostable plastics, because you'll probably see more of those in time. And, you know, like definitely want to end on the note that they're not the perfect solution. They have some issues. They're difficult. They're not widely accepted. And we can definitely be aware of that while also potentially moving forward with them. But that is, you know, it's an interesting discussion to have. So, I mean, I really want to thank everyone here for joining the conversation. If you're interested in learning more about the local food waste diversion that we do here at Elm City Compost, I want you to feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can ask some questions. And I look forward to hearing from you all and having some more discussion. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Albert. I think what we're going to do is move in to some of the Q&A. And I know there's been some questions posted in the chat, but there were some that were sent earlier. So I'm going to try sharing my screen again with my compilation of questions so far. Looking for, here we are. Okay, share. So if you can see, I have a spreadsheet right now. If everyone can see my screen. Talia had questioned something for, and maybe I'll make it a little bigger so you can read it a little easier here. She wanted to have the challenge of reducing plastic in a household with young children. There's so much waste potential for kids, diapers, toys, and packaging, on-the-go snacks, often in single-serve portions. Parents of young kids are so busy and overwhelmed, which makes it harder to give up the convenience of these items to try to reduce plastic use. So an example, single-serve pouches of applesauce, which can be eaten without mess in the car and can be tossed in my purse without spill concerns, but use so much plastic for just a single serving. I'd love to know how I can do better without too much hassle. And we were going to start with Christina, but so we'll start with Christina and put you on the spot if you have any suggestions.
Sure. I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat if I can move my windows around here. The short answer is that you can go online and there are refillable pouches. There are Stasher is a brand that makes a silicone resealable bag that will replace a Ziploc bag. We Sprout makes, oh, sorry, the links didn't come through, but We Sprout makes a refillable like baby food pouch or an applesauce pouch. However, that pouch is still made of plastic. It's a thicker plastic, but it's still plastic. So a couple of issues with that is that when eventually that's going to end up in the landfill, that will still end up as plastic in the landfill. And you're still dealing with potential microplastic ingestion. So we know that one of the pathways for microplastics to enter the body is through ingestion, right? Inhalation also, but ingestion. So I would say to think about what you're swapping it with. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. I am very familiar with the challenges of on-the-go snacks and water bottles and diapering. I cloth diapered my son exclusively, and I washed my own diapers. It was not easy. I partially cloth diapered my daughter, and found the most sustainable diaper with the lowest amount of sap that I could find. So it's, there is a transition. I think there's a reason why these products are popular. Remember that plastic is made from fossil fuel, from oil and gas, which is subsidized by the government. That's how they keep these prices artificially low. There's also supply and demand. If people are demanding more of these, that's also going to keep the cost down and the alternative products higher, right? We see in renewable energy how solar and renewables are coming down in price as more people buy into them. So I would say be part of that change. Again, there are options to kind of transition you away from what your norm is. But ultimately, you do not want to be eating food out of plastic, which is again coated with some kind of chemical, some kind of degreasing agent. And you don't want that in your body or your child's body.
Okay, thank you so much, Christina. I'm gonna go, I'll just go down the list that we have of the earlier questions. And I don't know who to address this, so I'll ask any of the panelists to speak up. To explain the difference between plastic number 5 from number 1 and 2. And, you know, plastic number 5 is usually associated with a dairy product like yogurt. I think, I'm sure it's just made differently and with different materials, but is there anything else that can be added to that? If all the panelists are going to pass, I guess, you know, we
Well, well, if anyone wants to chime in here, I do know that 1 and 2 are the most recyclable plastics. So I know that that's how they're different. I can't tell you exactly the polymer difference, but.
Okay. And you know, it's some of it's related. So the next question on line 4 is the denomination of most prepared meal containers is seemed to be number 5. And, you know, could there be a law that forced prepared meals containers to be obligatory compostable? And I think, Christina, you also addressed this in your talk, you know, as far as making rules by location, by municipalities, et cetera.
Yes. Do you want me to say anything more about that? That kind of connects with what Beth asked in the chat, I think.
Oh, great. Yes. And I did hear
local, let's see, she said sort of that takes local policy. So that's how you can deal with it, is by local policy. So you can have a ordinance or you know, bring a warrant article that, like with the polystyrene, says that, you know, you're effectively banning whatever container, whatever plastic takeout containers in your municipality. So that's exactly what I was talking about. So we're not waiting around for state policy. Things are getting stuck. It's hard to get things through. So we're looking to do it in our communities, and you can do it. And there is the 10 Towns, 10 Actions Toolkit that helps you and resource leaders depending on where you live. So we can walk you through those steps. So you just have to start by reaching out through the toolkit.
Okay, thank you again. Caps of bottles being recycled separately. Anybody know any information about the difference between the plastic containers and the plastic caps?
I think I'll speak on that just like really quickly. And this is something I dealt with more when I worked at the co-op and had more frequent communication with the recycling practices and the recyclers. I think it really is just depends on who is collecting your materials and their preference. Plastic recycling is very much complicated, and it really depends on who's collecting that material. So I know that a couple of the local recyclers, that material is sent to very specific places, whereas other places all sent to a big facility that separates it all with machines and whatnot. So it's tough because there's no super easy answer to that one. You just have to ask your facility.
Right. I have a feeling that's the case for a lot of these. And then the next one, which is line 6, the styrofoam containers, can they be banned? I think that relates to the other question about rules going to the municipalities. And Maine, I guess, was successful, but I think we have to start at the community level. I don't know if there's anything else that can be added. But the line 7 was an interesting one. What can we do to inspire consumers to bring their own containers? And how can we help restaurants allow that? And that's mainly the question.
I feel bad jumping in here, so interrupt me, other panelists, if you want. So Surfrider has an ocean-friendly restaurant program where we do just that. It is now free. There used to be a fee, so restaurants can participate. They have to meet certain criteria and not have, for instance, plastic-toed containers, straws only upon request, and when they're offer a non-plastic straw. So that's one option for restaurants. There also are local movements. So Dover right now, the Dover Democrats Plastic Working Group is working with their local restaurants, with their local economic business development office to show the benefits to restaurants on demand or upon request rather. If a restaurant simply holds all accessory items, plastic, utensils, condiments, that can save the restaurant a lot of money because they're not handing those items out. And then they can have the funds to upgrade to non-plastic alternatives when they do need to provide that item. So I think you, individuals in your communities, you can go to these restaurants. And again, you're welcome to approach me about the Ocean Friendly Restaurants program because we do not have any in New Hampshire. We have them in Maine and Massachusetts and all over the place. And there are local leaders also looking to bring this into restaurants.
Great, thank you, Christina. I think money talks. I mean, the restaurants you go to, and consumers can constantly ask restaurant owners, et cetera, and eventually a message will be given. So I think that also works. I'm trying to see, let's go.
Yeah.
Beth, I'm sorry. Beth, did you get your question answered from Christina? Okay.
I want to add to Natalie's question about inspiring consumers.
Great.
It's really important consumer actions, but it's also really more important to create lasting systems where it's easier to do the right thing. It's easier to not have to use disposable materials, and there are these systems for making that possible, and for people to not have to prepare so much to go against the current of the plastic tap of all of these plastic that come our way. Like, for example, in restaurants, there can be with this type of policy of banning single-use plastics or requiring the restaurants don't offer the single-use plastic straw by default, but instead having the option upon request. So that's something that makes that change in the process to make it more easier for people. Because sometimes when you go to a restaurant, they already gave you the straw, so there's no point. It's already going to go to the trash.
Thank you. Thanks, Joshua. Let's see. Susan had asked a question. Susan D, how can we convince our local stores to stop using single-use plastics, as in dessert and deli items?
Well, I'll jump in again, say, I mean, you can, if you have a relationship with that store, and you know, if it's a small business, you could certainly walk in yourself and, you know, have that conversation. Or again, it becomes about trying to get to a policy to support getting that out of all stores and starting with, you know, one particular single-use item. But I would encourage, you know, I think that building relationships, right, with people and restaurant owners and business owners and And having that initial conversation, they might be interested in running a pilot program or switching over or hearing more about it.
And I mean, something I would love to add to that too is that, definitely as people who are probably busy and whatnot, something that I, as like a good rule of life, is not just bring a problem, but also to bring some solutions. So, if you go up to restaurant owners with viable options and you have that on hand to have a conversation, they might be more amenable to it. It's easy to say like, yeah, you shouldn't do something, and that might get disregarded. But if you have options, then you can always discuss those options.
Thank you, Albert. Our next question from Beth, Joshua, impacts you discuss seem so huge. How can we most easily help people understand, care, and take action?
Beth, thank you so much for that question. Really important that question. And I think that as more people learn about how the whole life cycle of plastics is not good in so many ways, like from oil extraction, having to extract oil for getting those petrochemicals that are the components for refining it into plastics, by also producing the plastics, creating those emissions, those refineries being mostly located in low-income communities of color, and also disposing of the plastics, even if it's recycled. We don't know, like, if we toss into a recycle bin, we don't know if that it's going to be recycled in the end. Like, what's happening right now is that these materials are being exported to developing countries for processing the whole cycle. But this often doesn't happen. What it does happens is that these countries don't have all the infrastructure to manage all of that huge amount of plastics are coming their way. China used to take in all of the plastic scrap, but these materials has been so dirty and so not ideal for recycling that it's basically waste. So they end up with a problem of having to manage the trash that is coming their way. So that's why countries are no longer accepting plastic scrap, because it's not feasible to recycle it, because it's so dirty. And as more people understand this, that plastics have many impacts that are not good through many spheres. Like, people can take actions from their different spheres of influence, like as individuals, telling their friends not to use plastics, or if they work in a company, being an ambassador for plastic reduction, a plastic reduction advocate at your company, at your workplace, and also telling politicians to take the decisions for reducing plastics at a systemic scale. Like, thinking through in a comprehensive way, we can like have add up to dealing with this problem, like, because it's something on a global scale. Like, we're looking at local, regional, in national and international scale.
Yeah, yeah, all great points. Two key ones being, I think, education is so important. If people don't understand how things work, why does it matter? And then also that one-on-one, talking to friends, you know, saying, I don't use thus and such, I think is sometimes more powerful than kind of general messaging. So thank you, Joshua. That was great.
Thank
All
you so
right,
much for your
thank you.
question.
Thank you, Albert. We have a question for you, line 11. Have you come across any suitable bags for a pay per throw system?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to make a few assumptions and someone can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming the pay per throw is just a waste collection system where you're paying for your bags and you pay for your waste disposal per bag. I'm assuming that's what we're talking about here. And I guess to interpret that a little bit more is that if there's a compostable, okay, if there's a compostable product or some kind of a bag that is good for that. And I think it's a difficult question. You know, if something is going to be going into a landfill, it's not any better if it's a compostable plastic bag per se. It's still just kind of waste product at that point. The other downfall is that compostable bags, because they're made to break down over time, often weaken pretty quickly. So they can they'll start degrading faster, which is great for a compostable standpoint, a little challenging for maybe a household standpoint. You know, like getting away from plastic has quite a bit of challenges. You know, for instance, for my business, we have compostable liners that we use, and we just switched to one that we found was better for the composting process, but it also means there are more leaks, more tears, more rips. And it's just something that we have to kind of live with and provide suggestions. So I'm sorry that I don't have a great product on hand. I will say that for compostable plastics, of course, make sure it's BPI certified, but as you're looking for those kind of materials, if you look through the descriptions, you can often find a millimeter rating, which is the thickness of the bag, and the thicker the bag, the better it will hold up.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Albert. We have a couple of comments from Maria. One is on line 12. That these days, most restaurants bring you a container to box up your leftovers. But if you bring your own container for leftovers, that works. And thank you, Maria, for sharing that. I've done that a number of times. Yes, it's just very easy to do. And then the other one is from Maria is on line 14, just to ask at a restaurant not to bring straws by saying that you're plastic free. And then going back to Linda's question, restaurant, and this will be our last one because we're right at the restaurant and deli owners need to know the options. They may not change. They may want to change to less plastic, but do not know how to do it safely. And then how can we help them find products and suppliers? I wonder if there's a website for that.
I threw some links in the chat, Mary.
Awesome.
Within the toolkit, there was a spreadsheet with actual products and their prices, which may or may not be up to 2022.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And there are different programs. I put a link to plasticfreerestaurants.org that I have not tried this, but they do have a process for restaurants to submit the difference in their previous plastic, takeouts or whatever the product was, and then their switch over to compostables, and they will cover the cost of that transition. So that's something interesting to bring to restaurants to check out. And Beth had just popped in the chat that, recycling is broken, move to reuse. Absolutely. We want to focus on reusable systems. So we have to be, again, as Albert was saying, bioplastics are still plastic, and they still mimic plastic in the environment, and especially in the marine environment. And they can still contain, still be coated with chemicals. And so recycling, unfortunately, the latest report is under 6% of stuff sent to recycle is actually recycled. We have to also remember that plastic loses its integrity each time it is recycled. So it's only recycled a couple times, and that's, you know, it, and, you know, overall. So recycling for plastic is really not a solution. So we need to support, again, reusables. And just like you're saying, go to that restaurant and bring your box or bring your cup. The more customers do that, restaurants will start to need to cater to it, right? And educating in a very friendly way, like you're all saying, you know, nobody wants to be told that what they're doing is wrong. Instead, provide solutions and help them, you know, figure out that maybe it's making a little sign next to the register that, you know, says reusable cups allowed or something like that. So just starting these conversations is huge.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Can I
And
snag one? I'm so
Sure.
sorry.
yeah,
There's something I forgot to mention for the very first question about mothers, diapers and whatnot. Like, I just wanted to throw a tiny 2 cents out there. There are a few fun companies out there in different states that have some interesting programs with composting diapers and that kind of waste. They're very specific. But, you know, I think there are interesting grassroots programs too that can help take care of some of those more unique issues, especially when you deal with baby waste and diapers. You know, definitely reusing is the better option. But there are, you know, you might see some interesting things or little businesses that pop up in the meantime that will be kind of interesting. Or, you know, if you ever see one of those needs and you might have access to a friend, you know, like there are ways to also get interesting programs started up in the region. You know, that's kind of how Study came about too. So if you still see a little bit of a need and you might have a solution, it's worth talking to people to see if there's a kind of to build that into maybe not a business, but a little tiny movement within your small area. You know, just food for thought. I saw the compostable diapers, and I think that was kind of a fun thing to bring up.
excellent. Thank you so much, Albert. Donna shared this one comment that I wanted to be sure that everybody got to see. Never give up. If we don't voice our aversion to plastics, we are all at fault, and we have the right to be a pain and speak our mind. So, amen to that. Anyway, I think Judy Brophy is our tech, and I think when we do the recording, is there a way that we can also share the information that's in the chat? You can. I'm going to try copying it now, but I think I'll. If everybody is done, then we'll include that when we send the link out.
Yeah,
So,
definitely possible. Yes.
thank you so much. And so I just want to say I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you all thank you panelists, really just wonderful, all your information you shared and your time, and for the interest of all the people. And hopefully you've all learned something and can begin to change lives. So I guess with that, we'll say, yeah, thank you all.